Now I want to talk a little bit about time. What is it? Our culture has one word for time, but we mean different things by it, actually, so it's very confusing. We have what we could call physical time or evolutionary time. Now, this is simply the things that are happening in the world. You might call them the events that are happening. Physical and mental events. Now, one thing I want to note about physical time here is that it doesn't flow. The culture teaches us, we teach each other that time flows, physical time flows, and yet scientists, particularly physicists, have not found any flow of time out there in their research. Time seems to flow somewhere else. Another aspect of time is clock time. Okay, this is the measurement of physical time. It measures time, physical time, for measurement and coordination purposes. And we have what we call our sense of time. That's more or less the ability to guess where the hands of the clock are. That's our sense of time. We learn that in grade school. If we don't learn that in grade school in our culture, we're considered somewhat negligent, socially negligent. There's another aspect of time which we could call psychological or inner time. Now, this seems to be where the flow of time really is. We see it as something objective and external in this culture, and yet there's a lot of evidence that it's simply psychological. And it includes all of our different feelings of time passing. So anxiety about time, time pressures, feeling overwhelmed, time poverty, the feeling that we don't have enough time. All those are felt perceptions of time, and they're all included in what I call psychological or inner time. And what I found with myself and thousands of other people doing a lot of research and workshops like this is that psychological time actually measures how much we're separate from what we're doing, how much we're either resisting what we're doing or simply feel separate from what's at hand. That's what it's a measure of. And I'll talk about that more later too. The very pervasive feeling of time flowing in our culture is what I call linear time. Basically, that's what's described here on the slide. It is seeing time as a physical reality only, something objective out there that's flowing more or less horizontally among past, present, and future at the same unchangeable speed for all of us. So it seems like a given that we have in common and which is external. That's the cultural perspective, and I call that linear time. Now, my hypothesis so far is that pressure depends on how much we're separating ourselves from the task at hand. Another question is, can we break that down somehow, maybe to get a better handle on this? What factors are involved? I've identified two main ones. The first one is what most people don't expect at all. Our ordinary sense of time passing seems to be the infrastructure for our felt time pressures. Our simple feeling of time passing from moment to moment has a little bit of pressure and anxiety to it. And when that's intensified, it seems to be when we have what we would normally call severe time pressures. It seems like the source of our ordinary feeling of time pressure is having suppressed or repressed negative feelings in the past. That seems to be the whole source of it. It doesn't come from any other place. It's transformed energy. The other aspect that I've identified that contributes to time pressure is situational feelings. So our general feeling of time passing seems to result from having pushed away negative feelings in the past. The situational or current feelings are another factor. So if I might feel guilty about not getting a project done because there's other people on the project, or I might feel humiliated because I don't get my part done in time, that will add energy to what I'm doing. And it can make considerable time pressure as a result. And there's all kinds of different feelings. Any kind of feeling actually can add pressure or intensity to what we're doing. So fear, embarrassment, guilt, insecurity, shame, confusion, sadness, anger, anything like that. If we push those away, it seems to add intensity to the pressure that we feel. Now, at best, people will deal with some of those situational feelings. They'll recognize those as sources of pressure and try to deal with those to eliminate or reduce the pressure at least. But I think it's also possible, in the long term at least, to significantly reduce the ordinary feeling of time passing that we have, and possibly eventually even do away with it to prevent time pressure from ever building up in the first place. Well, let me ask you this question. Maybe we can see a little more relevance. When you're doing your best work, how do you experience time? It flies. Anybody else have a different response?
Don't feel anything.
Don't feel anything. Not aware of it.
Right.
No sense of it.
Right.
Okay, anybody else have a different one? Okay. I've asked that question to well over a couple thousand people now, and they say exactly the same thing. There's two responses. It flies, or I'm not aware of it. About 80% of people would say they're not aware of it. And maybe 20%, 25% will say it flies. In either case, what seems to be common is that there's no sense of anxiety about it. The normal anxiety about it is gone. And that sense that we don't have enough of it is not there. I mean, you would expect that in a peak experience. Peak experiences also include peak work experiences. So it seems to be the case that during our best work, we're not really aware of time in such a way that it's stressful for us. Physical time is still passing. Events are still occurring in the world, and yet they don't feel stressful to us. So there's kind of a paradox here. And that seems to be partly what causes a lot of confusion. Time's still passing, but it doesn't feel like it. That's the paradox. Now, we might take that as a kind of a goal or a vision, that during our best work, we're not aware of time passing. Now, what's confusing is that some people will say, but that means you're not aware of what time it is. But what I found is that being aware of clock time is completely independent of psychological time, and that means knowing what time it is independent of feeling time passing. The experience of time passing doesn't guarantee that you're on top of things. In fact, just the opposite. If you're not aware of time passing as a feeling, a felt perception, you have much greater chance of doing your best work. And I have documented examples of surgeons going from operating room to operating room, knowing exactly what time it is, being thoroughly involved in their work, apparently timeless, and knowing to the half minute when to go to the next operating room, over a period of hours in some cases. And they don't even wear a watch. That's kind of a far-out example. But it seems to be possible to not only know what time it is, clock time, but also to not be aware of this time flow that we're so used to. How many of you have gone to bed and said, I want to wake up at 6:30 and not used an alarm and woken up at exactly 6:30, even once? How many of you did that? That's just about everybody, yeah? Now, were you aware of time passing when you slept? How did that work? Maybe it's possible that clock time, our feeling of time passing, is independent of knowing what time it is.